Okay, we are looking to solve this quadratic equation with, I wrote down QF for the quadratic formula. This is the quadratic formula right here. It's a pretty straightforward relationship that you can use, and you can jump right into it as long as your equation is set equal to 0, which this is. So that's going to give me a very clearly defined a value, because that's in front of the x squared, plus bx plus c. The b is in front of the x, and the c is the constant. So if I look at this, I got my a value, my b value, and my c value. So it's really important that I correctly pull those out. A is 6, b is 4, and c is -3. So I'm going to go ahead and just put them into the quadratic formula, and I'm going to set up space here like a big fraction bar. It's going to be whatever b is, but it's going to be the opposite, so it'll be whatever b is, right? Plus or minus the square root, b squared, so whatever b is squared, minus 4 times whatever the a value, whatever the c value is, all over 2 times whatever a is. So this is just sort of setting up space for it. I'll put the numbers in, the opposite of b, so -4, plus or minus, that's going to be 4 squared, minus 4 times 6 times -3, all over 2a. A is 6. Okay, so once you get the pieces into place, what I would highly recommend doing is this piece first. It's called the discriminant. The piece under the radical is the discriminant. And if we just do that number, so not even the square root, just the part that's under it. So I'm going to do 4 squared minus 4 times 6 times a -3. That's going to give me the number 88. And that makes it a lot easier to kind of work through. And it tells me, because this is a positive number, I know I'm going to get real numbers. My solutions are actual numbers as opposed to our complex solutions. So I get the square root of 88 all over 12. Now let's see, this gets a little bit complicated as far as our simplified answer. If you're going for exact answer, it's a couple steps. If we just want the approximate answer, the decimal value, that's actually not too bad. 88 is not a perfect square, right? It doesn't go, if I do the square root of 88, right, square root of 88, it's going to give me a decimal value. It's not a perfect square. So I can type this thing into the calculator and just get my two answers, but I got to be really careful with parentheses. The calculator, virtually all the models I've used, they always kind of start with a parentheses around the square root. And then you have to be very careful with everything in the top being squared. Now, since I did this multiplication, it's not that big a deal, but if I had left it as 2 times 6, I would need parentheses around all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and type this in. For my numerator, I'm going to start -4, and I'll just do one at a time. You cannot do both. You have to pick one. I'm going to do plus square root of 88. Now, again, look, we can see that the calculator started me with that set of parentheses. So I'm going to close that, close what I did here in kind of a purpley maroon. And then I need to close for the top. Now I can divide by 12. So that, my first answer is x is about, and let's see, I'll find it 2 decimal places. That's reasonable. 0.45. And then I'll just bring the thing back up, and I'm going to do everything the same, except for I'm going to make that minus, right, because I can only do one at a time. And this one is about -1.12, right? That rounds to a 2 because of that 5 right next to it. So those are, by the way, my answers, as long as I'm allowed to give approximate. Okay, so these are your approximate solutions. They've been rounded. They have decimal equivalents. Approximate solutions. Okay. If, however, I did need to keep them exact, I'll show you that work. And that's where we have to like simplify this as a square root. And it's going to be a few more steps. 88, as we know, is not a perfect square. But let's see, 88, 4 definitely goes into it. And I'll check to see if 16 does, because often if 4 does, 16 does. But it doesn't look like it will. So 88, I'm going to rewrite as 4 times 22, because that's a perfect square. Plus or minus the square root of 4 times 22, all over 12. -4 plus or minus. So now I'm going to split these up individually. Square root of 4 and the square root of 22. So this becomes 2. Square root of 24 all over 12. And I'm almost done. The only issue here is that 2, 12, and 4 all have common factors. 2 goes into all of them. So I'm going to divide each by a 2. That one's going to go away because it effectively becomes 1. This will become 6, and that'll become 2. So my final answer, -2 plus or minus the square root of 22 all over 6. That's the exact answer. This is if I needed an exact solution, as opposed to the approximate, or I can get the decimals in the calculator. This would be my exact solution. And that's where the square root symbol stays in there if it's not a perfect square. Okay, hope that's helpful. Message me anytime with questions.